everyone can see that. And you all can hear me fine, right?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Let's give maybe one more minute for people to attend. We're at 51 now. And I know we've got a big agenda, so actually, why don't we just get started? And this is being recorded, so it'll be up on YouTube as well for folks to be able to review at that point. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Here we are, beginning right at 10:02 a.m. Pacific. Please take a moment to do one or more of the following. Please, if you do have questions, you can ask them using the Zoom Q&A feature. We're just trying to do that to manage the volume of questions that we might get. Follow us on Twitter at the OpenSSF. We are trying to get at OpenSSF, but don't quite have that yet. Feel free to sign up for the edX courses we've put up. That I think will be a really good way to get accelerated into both our universe and the world of securing software development in general. And there's our website, of course, at openssf.org. As with all other formal meetings of the Linux Foundation, we begin this meeting with the antitrust policy notice. This is something that some of you might not be familiar with, but it is something that helps keep us all in the clear from a legal point of view as we work together to build open source code and advance the state of things. This is available on the Linux Foundation website. It is the standard one. Feel free to review it at your leisure. This meeting as well is also governed by the Linux Foundation's Code of Conduct. And so that is one more thing that we'd love you all to be familiar with and to learn about and help us make sure that these meetings stay productive and positive and helpful to all people who want to participate. And just as another bit of housekeeping, please submit the questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen that all of you should be able to see. So why don't we jump in and begin? So just to give you kind of an overview of who'll be talking, I will give a very brief tour and update, since I believe the last time we did a town hall was February, which feels so long ago at this point, and we're way overdue for it. So we'd like to try to do these once a quarter, just to help grow the community and help keep people informed about what's going on. So there's a lot to update you on. Then we'll be hearing from Dustin Ingram on securing software repositories, hearing from Amir Montazeri about securing critical projects and the security audits work that's going on in the OpenSSF, signing, verifying, and protecting software with Sigstore by Azra Ali, and then finally, how to get involved in OpenSSF working groups and projects by our own David Wheeler, hopefully leaving us with at least 10 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to breeze through this. It all references stuff you'll be able to find elsewhere on our website. Apologies if it seems abbreviated. As all of you might know, and I haven't had a chance to really formally introduce myself, if not, I'm the general manager for the Open Source Security Foundation. I've been with the Linux Foundation for about 6 years now. But active in the broader open source community since dinosaurs roamed the web. The purpose of the Open Source Security Foundation is to inspire and enable the community to secure the open source software we all depend upon, including the development, testing, fundraising, infrastructure, and support initiatives driven by working groups, which are not inherently or necessarily software focused themselves, and by projects which are software focused, each forming technical initiatives. So this is about just what is our theory of change? Like, how do we go out in the world? We're not trying to be like the CNCF, where we're the home for all things security. We're not trying to be like Hyperledger, where we're trying to like push something dramatically new and different. What we're trying to do is pull together the best practices, the best things that happen out there in the open source world when it comes to securing the supply chain, to up-level everybody, right? To try to figure out where are the gaps, what's missing. And sometimes that's education and guides and funding of security audits. Sometimes it is new code, such as Sigstore or specifications like Salsa. There's a really rich rainbow of different projects at OpenSSF, and I encourage you all to check it out. Predominantly, we are driven as a developer and a maintainer and a volunteer-first organization. We try to have a minimum viable bureaucracy in what we do. And this is really just intended to help you understand kind of how the pieces fit together. From the bottoms up, though, we have 7 different working groups focused on broad thematic areas. And within each of those working groups, a series of technical initiatives that they focus on a mix of software projects and non-software projects, as I mentioned. There is a path to get new working groups created under OpenSSF, but that's a lot of takes a lot of rigor. Starting new things within one of the existing working groups is always going to be better. We also have a set of associated projects. Now it's the categorization's a little something we're still working out in practice. Sigstore is definitely a core part of the OpenSSF, but it has a funding mechanism of its own that helps it do some things on top of what we're able to provide from OpenSSF. But we also have 2 that are a little bit more distinct that also live kind of operationally within the working groups, but have a bit of their own direction and prerogative. One is called Alpha Omega, which is focused on securing software by doing scanning of a wide number of repositories for new kinds of vulnerabilities, as well as directing funding to open source foundations and other alpha projects to help them basically capacity build and up-level their security practices. And then the GNU Toolchain Infrastructure Project is about supporting the GNU project's build infrastructure. The core, when you think about how much that code is used and just ingested as binaries by so many distributions and other software packages out there, we felt this was in particular a project that was worthy of supporting. And then at a high level, we've got support from a number of different organizations I'll show you in just a bit. Most of those organizations are represented on the governing board, and then the governing board has a bit of kind of oversight and management of the TAC, the Technical Advisory Council. But these 2 organizations are much more like peers. The TAC is really the home for all things technical, kind of coordinating that and having some oversight on the working groups. And the governing board is there to provide resources, provide funding, to provide marketing support, budget and finance, planning, public policy. These are kind of some things the governing board does. But really the heart and soul of the OpenSSF is there in the TAC and the working groups and all the technical initiatives. Very briefly, thanks to all of our companies who are supporting us at either the premier level, which means you have a seat on the board, or at the general or associate member. These are all organizations that believe in the fight, that are contributing in one way or another, and that we're really grateful for their involvement in the OpenSSF. And in fact, we have some news to announce just today. It hasn't yet formally hit the wires or the press or anything like that, but we have a bunch of new members to announce, including Capital One joining as another premier member. So they'll be joining the board. Capital One has made a huge commitment to open source software adoption internally, as well as starting to create it externally. And so they join a number of other financial organizations who are members of the OpenSSF. And in addition, we've got some other great companies joining from around the world, really, when you think about the geographic distribution of them. And it's great to have them engaged. I won't spend time here, but our governing board, again, the group that provides the resources to do everything we need to do, is filled with a bunch of very senior folks, many of them at a C-level inside of some pretty amazing organizations. So very grateful for their help on it. As I mentioned, the heart of what we do is the Technical Advisory Council and all the technical initiatives. And these are the 7 representatives from the technical community who help coordinate that work and help harmonize everything that goes on and make sure that it's all at a level that all of us can be proud of. So I deeply appreciate the commitment and time that they're making to this project, because they're all volunteers here. And finally, this is just a quick glance at the staff that is supporting these operations. Some of us are very behind the scenes. Others are out there giving presentations and the like. And many of them, some of them are also based in Asia, helping us grow the community out there. And I'm very grateful to all of them, very indebted to them for helping build a really efficient organization behind what we do. We are hiring, and these are 4 positions that will be full-time and report to the Linux Foundation, but work in this case specifically on Alpha Omega. And this is for the roles of lead program manager, security researcher analyst, and software security engineer. There are links available on this deck when we send it, also from the OpenSSF website. The best way to just remain aware of what's going on, if you don't want to immerse inside of a given working group or a given project, if you want to just remain at a high level, is to follow our blog. That is adorably 2004 era, perhaps, but we find that is really the best way to get real technical information out in a thoughtful way, and yet also have a degree of informality and help share not only the technical stuff going on, but some of the organizational and global kinds of things. Our blog also has articles contributed by our member community, and sometimes even from first-time contributors or people's first experiences with different tools or with the education modules, for example, that sort of thing. So would welcome all of you not only to read that, but also have that in mind if you'd like to be a contributor. We are always open to contributions from certainly our core contributor community, but even beyond. So won't read through these here because I'm actually covering a lot of them in the subsequent slides, but really invite you to look at that or follow us on Twitter. One of the most important events we've had since February has been OpenSSF Day at the Open Source Summit North America in Austin, just June 20th. Feels like yesterday in a way. And we had a couple hundred people there in person, as well as several hundred following along virtually. All of the presentations are available on our YouTube channel, and so there's even a playlist. Once we distribute these slides, you'll be able to click on that and watch the different presentations that were given. And we will be repeating this in Dublin next month on Tuesday, September 13th. If you're able to get to Dublin, if you are based in Europe or otherwise able to attend or otherwise planning to be in Dublin that week, that is the week of the Open Source Summit that the Linux Foundation is producing, we'd love to have you there to attend. And if you'd like to be involved, let us know as well. We're still putting together the agenda for this, but we have a bunch of great speakers already lined up. Finally, I wanted to close just by mentioning the other big news since February is that in kind of early part of this spring, we responded to a call from the U.S. government, certainly, but by many others in the wake of the Log4Shell vulnerability and the disruption that caused in the industry, to think about what would it take to actually take all these flowers that are kind of springing up from this garden, all these software packages, the guides, the educational content. What would it take to actually put those into action to the degree where you could credibly go and say, we've really made a dent in mitigating the chances of the next Log4Shell or the next major vulnerability causing this massive earthquake in society, or when it does happen, mitigating the cost of that going down the road. So we really thought hard about, as a community, about where are the gaps out there. We talked a lot with the folks in government studying this topic. We came up with a set of 10 different streams of effort that are nicely separate from each other, but build upon each other's work. Many of those mapping to existing OpenSSF initiatives, some of them mapping to external initiatives or initiatives that haven't even been started yet. We then asked our community to form teams around those different 10 and come up with what would a first year or first 2 years of operations look like to actually put this into practice, right? Assuming lots of volunteers can show up to help, but not necessarily presuming that volunteers can do all the work, right? If you really want to set a target of getting 1 million people to take the training course, for example, on secure software fundamentals, there's a lot that volunteers can accomplish to make that work. But sometimes you want to spend some money too on partnerships, on marketing, on those kinds of things, right? So what's that minimum viable kind of amount that we would spend? And we came up across those 10 with a 2-year budget of $150 million, which seems like a lot of money to an open source project. It seems pretty pricey on one hand, but this is 150 million ounces of prevention for what could or most likely would be tons and tons of cure well beyond that. So we've gotten a lot of great reception to this. We rolled it out with a meeting in DC in May, a combination of many of you and the organizations you work for or represent that were there at this meeting, along with folks from the US government. And so our goal wasn't to go and ask the government for money directly. It was to say, here's what we in the open source community are doing on this front, and we'd love your help. let's find ways to work together. And in fact, we have. And at that meeting, we were also able to line up. This was again not our goal, but this really just emerged out of the conversations, and especially in the last week before that meeting, with 30 million in commitments from Amazon, Ericsson, Google, Intel, Microsoft, and VMware, as well as conversations now beginning with many other partners, even far beyond the existing OpenSSF community, to go and ultimately fulfill that $150 million number. And we're already getting started on a number of the streams. So and it was, finally, I'll just end with, it was reassuring to see the Cyber Safety Review Board report on Log4j come back at the end of July, well, early July, so about a month ago, which was kind of a summary of everything that happened in that event. And OpenSSF was mentioned in that report 29 times when it came to potential ways to address those issues that led to the vulnerability in the first place. So that was pretty gratifying to see, and evidence that the world is kind of behind what we're doing here, that the world needs what we're doing here, and it's kind of up to us to organize and make it work. But we could certainly use all of your help in accomplishing some really big things we have in front of us. So with that, I'd like to pass the baton over to Dustin, and get started on hearing more about securing software repos. So Dustin, are you okay with me driving? You just tell me next slide, or did you want to drive?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, thanks, Dustin.
Awesome. You can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So hey folks, I'm Dustin. I'm a senior software engineer at Google, where I work on our open source security team. That team is an externally focused team, not just focused on Google's open source projects or properties, but generally working on improving security across all open source software and across all ecosystems. I am a little partial to one ecosystem. I am also a director of the Python Software Foundation, and I also maintain the Python package index, which means that I'm a maintainer of a software repository and one of the sort of larger ones that exist. Next slide. So one thing we started doing quite a little while ago now, myself and the Ruby Gems folks, we kind of were having some informal chats about things like package signing and whatnot, and we decided that this made sense as an OpenSSF working group. So we now have a securing software repos work group, and this is sort of I like to call it group therapy for the software repository maintainers, because we all sort of get together every 2 weeks and we talk about all sorts of things that sort of are inherent to running and maintaining a software repository. But also we spend a lot of time discussing potential improvements and changes and sharing notes across what each of these sort of ecosystems is doing, right? I wouldn't say we're necessarily in competition with each other, and we really want to see each other succeed. So this has been incredibly helpful, and I'm amazed we hadn't done it sooner, because we've really like collaborated on sort of general plans around things like package signing, two-factor mandates, things like that. And it's been really valuable. And also sort of just like focusing on adoption, right? So we have projects of the OpenSSF, and we're trying to figure out what would be the best way to make them successful and integrated into the repositories where people are going to end up actually using them. So yeah, this work group is sort of a good place for people who are maintainers to share their experiences, discuss those problems, risks, and threats. But it's also, I think, a good place if you want to sort of understand where these software repositories are headed, or what we're thinking of, or what we're working on, and maybe if you're interested in helping contribute. A lot of the stuff that we're discussing represents the new work that's happening in a lot of these places. So especially for those of them that are open source projects, it'd be a great place to come and share your voice. Next slide, please. So yeah, there's a lot of things that sort of fall under the umbrella of this work group, essentially to cross-pollinate between ecosystems. If some ecosystem or some organization or some repository comes up with a really like great idea, making sure that everyone else is aware of it and they understand it and they're able to adopt it or potentially even improve it even more. It sort of allows us as maintainers to align and coordinate things. Like I said, for example, the two-factor mandate stuff, like a lot of folks are making announcements about those recently, but we've been sort of talking in the background about that in public via the working group for quite a while and trying to figure out the best paths forward there for each of these repositories. So that's been really great use of the work group. And yeah, just a lot of regular stuff. And again, like kind of just focused on, there's other work groups at the OpenSSF, and they're doing really interesting stuff. And we're sort of practically trying to figure out how to apply them to these really big software repositories. Next slide. Yeah, as the chair of this work group, I'd really like to invite anyone listening to join us. Come and listen to one of our work group sessions. They happen every other week, and they alternate between sort of EMEA, European friendly times, and APAC, Asia Pacific friendly times. So we have pretty good coverage there across all possible time zones. And we also have a securing software repos channel in the OpenSSF Slack where you can find all of us as well and have some informal chat or discussion. And I'd love to see you there. Back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Dustin. And feel free to ask questions in the Q&A kind of slide section, and we might be able to get them answered as we go along. And certainly we'll leave time at the end for kind of more open Q&A if you have any then. But feel free to queue up questions even in anticipation of that. So now I'd like to pass the baton to Amir Montazeri to talk about the work of the Securing Critical Projects Working Group and the security audits work that he and others do through OSTIF. Amir?
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Good morning and afternoon, everybody. I'm Amir. I'm the co-founder and managing director of OSTIF. That's the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund. Bit of a mouthful, but basically what we do is help open source projects improve their security posture, typically through security audits and associated work. We've done a ton of audits so far this year and have been doing so since 2015, really honing in on a good model for working with open source projects and improving their security posture holistically and in a way that helps the project over the long term. We've strategically partnered with LF, Linux Foundation, since 2020 and have worked closely with OpenSSF. I contribute to securing critical projects and trying to help in providing insight into ways to basically do that, to secure important projects that a lot of folks depend on, as well as identifying security threats and increasing awareness with security reviews and the great work that's happening out there. I have a quick update for the Securing Critical Projects Workgroup, which is on the next slide. I do apologize, my update doesn't have as much kind of contextual information, but we're a collective of a good group of folks that meet every 2 weeks. We are incorporating an APAC-friendly time zone to alternate to be more inclusive of folks in different time zones. And what we're currently working on is one of our main objectives is an effective, inclusive, and repeatable process for having a set list of projects deemed critical. So we're currently in phase 1, which is really to kind of build that out. And we're initially calling it a set, which I think is an important thing to note over a list, because to indicate that there's really no hierarchy or prioritization at this time. It's really just a set of projects that we're providing to the community for their review and analysis. We're currently exploring using GitHub as a tool, not to exclude non-GitHub projects, but just use GitHub as a way to kind of track changes and kind of have a process for doing this in a way that is transparent and inclusive. And we're currently building off of some previous work. So earlier in the year, late last year, we did, as a work group, do a first iteration and came up with a project list of about 100 projects. And as well as us, OSTIF, OSTIF, we have curated a short list of projects as well to provide another data point to help with that. And going along with that, next slide, please. We have some security audit results, some of which Brian did mention at the beginning were posted in the blog. But the first one was of Sigstore, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about soon. But this was sponsored by the Sigstore project. It's definitely a best practice to seek out third-party verification, independent security audit. And we were able to do that in collaboration with the Sigstore team. The result of that being one high severity vulnerability found and fixed. Next was the SLF4J audit. This was sponsored by Google and Ghost, GOSST, the Google open source security team. SLF4J, or Simple Logging Facade for Java, was identified in the recent Harvard Census 2 results as a top Java package in terms of downloads and use. And we were able to get it validated and reviewed and audited by a third party, in which one low-risk vulnerability was found and fixed. As well as some associated work, we currently have the curl security audit in progress. This was sponsored by OpenSSF. Just recently, I believe it was last Monday, OSTIF released a impact report with CNCF. It's a very quick read, but the TLDR being we worked with about 7 projects, had about 132 security improvements, including 45 CVEs, 5 of those being critical severity and 10 of them being high severity. There's currently a Google impact report in progress, which we hope to share with everyone soon, as well as planning more audits and bringing on new partners for 2023, thinking into the year ahead for doing more audits. I definitely recommend anyone listening, please join the work group if you are interested in this topic. We can definitely use all the help we can get. We have a great group of folks, and we'd love to see you there. We meet every 2 weeks, and the information is all on the OpenSSF website and our GitHub repo. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Amir. That's great. Now I'd like to pass the baton to Azra to tell you more about what's new and exciting in Sigstore. Azra?
Thanks, Brian. So I am going to be talking a little bit about Sigstore. So just as an introduction, in case any of you haven't seen me or met me before, my name is Astra, and I work at Google on the Google open source security team. And I'm a contributor and maintainer on Sigstore projects, as well as a couple other projects, including Go Tough, which is the update framework's Go implementation. And in the past, I have worked on Envoy, doing some security and fuzzing work there. So next slide, please. I'm going to be covering a little bit of updates with the Sigstore project in terms of administrivia, and it's also like some fun adoption events that have been going on recently that I'd love to shout out. So starting a little bit with the more administrivia fun announcements. The first thing is that our GA is projected for October. So this would involve general availability of full CO, Recore, and the services surrounding that. So hopefully our productionization efforts will be completed then. And we're super excited for this. We started a dry run of the on-call rotation. And yeah, we're looking forward to that. As well as that, we completed a new root signing event last month in which we rotated out one of our Sigstore root key holders. So super excited to welcome Joshua Locke from VMware as the new root key holder, and then saying a loving goodbye to Luke Hines, who is the rotated out key holder. And another really awesome shout out is to GitHub for their RFC on improving NPM security with Sigstore. So feel free to click on that RFC for the whole details there, but it involves how to integrate Sigstore into the NPM registry and use things like general tooling for Sigstore.js, which is released also this week. And then finally, in terms of administrivia, the technical steering committee added 2 new members, Trevor Rosen from GitHub and Santiago Torres Arias from Purdue. Both of them have been contributing a lot in the last 6 months and have been bringing new research ideas, new implementation, and really help guiding a lot of the focus work on Sigstore. So we're super excited to welcome them. All right, next slide. So in terms of other sorts of updates in the Sigstore community, one thing that we're starting to do as we're getting up to GA and so on, and is increase our adoptions and really integrate with a variety of different ecosystems. So URL-lib3 adopted Sigstore for signing releases. Seth Larson, who did the work there, has also been doing a ton of work on securing repositories on GitHub and releasing all sorts of templates to improve scorecard score and Sigstore release signing. As well as that, Trail of Bits released GitHub Actions for signing Python packages. And so I took a look at the implementation. It's extremely seamless and awesome. So I'm really excited to see more Python packages signed and a lot more integration in the Python community there. Another really cool shout out is Sigstore is in the production pipeline for Edgeless Systems' latest project Constellation, which does confidential computing. So we had a really nice presentation about that in the last Sigstore office hours. And then finally, we've been seeing a lot of integrations that are built on top of some of our Sigstore products. So we have a really awesome project called tLoghistory.dev that's logging transparently immutable tags on recourse that you can see, have I seen this project before using this tag. So just as kind of a conclusion, we've been doing a lot of integrations and a lot of work securing both ecosystems and package repositories and individual projects themselves. As a small shout out, we have Sigstore office hours now, which is every other week of our Sigstore community meeting. So if you go check out the Sigstore community calendar, that office hours is meant for users and developers and representatives of ecosystems to come and sort of chat or discuss where Sigstore can fit into their project. So with that, I'll kind of wrap up and hand it back to Brian. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Asra. And I will pass the baton immediately off to our own, what's the term I'm looking for? There's no one else like him. That's all I can say. David Wheeler, ladies and gentlemen. David?
Sure. Okay, I'll take that. Okay, so next slide. I'm going to talk about how to get involved because that's really important. We really, really do need people to get involved. The bad news is that there's a lot of challenges. The good news is there's a lot of opportunities. Here's a little bit about me. I've been honored to meet many of you, interact with many of you. If I haven't had that chance yet, I look forward to it. Next. So I'm not going to have time to talk about this whole OpenSSF structure. Brian showed this slide earlier. I'm going to primarily focus on the left, the working groups. Next. Oh, thank you. Great. So let me talk real quickly. If you are not currently involved or you're only involved in part of the OpenSSF, let me talk you through some of the working groups and at least a little bit about some of the projects and SIGs that they're working on. There's some terminological change that's happening. Project is being changed to a term about activities more focused on code and SIGs more on things that aren't code. To over summarize. So best practices working group, all involved with identification, awareness, education of security best practices. So this is where things like the OpenSSF best practices badge and scorecards live. It's where our educational efforts live, like the Secure Software Development Fundamentals, SKF, the Education SIG. Next up, Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group in red in the bottom left here. And this is basically all about efficient vulnerability reporting, remediation, things like various guides to help people do the job efficiently and be prepared for it. Next up, Identifying Security Threats. This is probably one of the more mysteriously named working groups. It's all about security metrics, reviews, things like we have a collection of many reviews of open source projects so that you can see if the project you're looking at has such. There's a dashboard, there's various other efforts. Next up, security tooling. It's all about state-of-the-art, globally accessible security tools. I think that actually kind of speaks for itself. We've already heard about the securing software repositories. Thank you very much, Dustin, for that awesome summary. Supply chain integrity. It's all about ensuring the provenance of open source code. This is where SALSA, the supply chain levels for software artifacts, lives. Next up, securing critical projects. We've already heard from Amir a lot about that. Identification of critical open source projects. This is where things like the criticality score and Harvard Research live. Next. So it kind of gives you an idea of how we've divided this up. I'm not going to have time to walk through this chart, but I just want to emphasize that, yes, there's a number of individual projects and SIGs, but they are very much intended to be able to work together. So if you look at things from the developer through source and build and packaging, and repeatedly looping through various dependencies and finally out to that consumer of that software, those various projects and SIGs end up all throughout the development distribution processes. Next. So how do you get involved? Well, if you're interested in first of all, if you are interested in a particular working group, project, SIG, look at what we're doing. If you are, take a look at those working groups and take a look at the particular working groups that you are interested in. Learn more. Each of those working groups tells them on their GitHub page how to get involved. Every working group has a virtual meeting on alternate weeks. Every working group has Slack channels and mailing lists. Basically, join, visit, participate. Just show up and kind of see what we're doing. So please get involved. Next. So again, if you're looking at joining a particular working group, go click and look at their GitHub homepage. Next. If you just want general announcements, we do have an OpenSSF announcements mailing list. We'll get a link in a moment, but if you follow the link, this is what you'll see, and just join that list, and you'll get a low traffic but hopefully high value email. Next. Attend our public meetings. If you're interested in a particular working group, show up at it. They will show theirs. We also just have a general OpenSSF mailing list. There's the shortened URL, so you can see our entire calendar of all the things that are going on if you want to show up multiple. Next. Slack. We use Slack. You want to see some of the things, go to slack.openssf.org. Go talk about things. I do want to warn that the Slack messages disappear after a while, so this is not a good place for detailed design analysis. But if you're trying to work out, hey, when can we meet to talk about this issue, or raise an issue for this is a great place for that. Next. Social media. We output on all sorts of social media: Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and if you found something really interesting that you think this large community would be interested in, let us know. We'd love to retweet or LinkedIn, that sort of thing, but let us know. Next. If your organization is interested in becoming a member, go here, openssf.org/join. OpenSSF depends on organizations as a whole to join, providing some funds, providing ways to connect to the different things that those organizations as a whole can do. This is very much an important part of making the OpenSSF effective. So thank you for all those who have joined. And if your organization hasn't, please contact us. We would love to talk with you about that. Next. So here's your little checklist, various URLs to go click on. I'm sure that we will get those links, and of course you can view this recorded message for later. Next, because one of the first ways that you can get involved is take the survey about today's town hall, because we want these town halls to be effective, and we want all of the things that we're doing to be effective. And this provides us some quick feedback so we can improve. Really, for everything that we do within the OpenSSF, it's all about where are we now, how can we improve? For the most part, perfection's awesome, but for the most part, we're focusing on where are we now, how can we make things better? And if we repeatedly make things better, that's really where it's at. And that's my last slide. So I think, Brian, I'm going to dump it back to you, and I think we're at Q&A now.
That's great, thanks. Yeah, let's open it up. I see some questions in the Q&A section. I think, David, you can see those as well. I think one of them was answered, how do I get involved with the OpenSSF community? But there's a large one as well about the VEX format. And David, or is there anybody else here from the vulnerability community who wants to take that? David, would you like to take that? I'm sorry, I have to get the door. So if you want to manage this for a bit, I'll be right back.
Yeah, so I'm quite well aware of the VEX program and VEX format. Sadly, I can't be at everything. Some people have claims about me to the contrary. So I personally haven't been as directly involved, but we certainly intend to take advantage of the VEX work and trying to integrate that and connect it to various folks. I certainly, the folks who are interested in particular with S-bombs, one of the key things that VEX does is, yes, there is a vulnerability. It's in a dependency of mine, but because of the way this dependency is used, it's not actually a vulnerability. So, we're certainly aware of it and that sort. If anybody else wants to speak up, but I mean, I think in general, the OpenSSF isn't interested in trying to redo what other folks are doing. We're very interested in using things that already exist, presuming that they're working well, and if they're not working well, maybe interacting with them to try to resolve some of the challenges. We're interested in solving the problems in the most effective, efficient way. Certainly not interested in redoing things. And I'm sure I've missed something important, so maybe Brian or somebody else can fill in what I didn't say.
No, that's very helpful. I mean, maybe Dustin, I don't know if has Vex come up, or it's kind of related as well to a different topic, which is S-bombs. As a way to try to find where organizations and the software they deployed have been vulnerable to that, to different things. Dustin, has Vex or S-bombs come up in the software repositories group?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the repositories we're sort of figuring out how SBOMs fit into existing artifacts that are there and how, in what way it makes sense to publish an SBOM for something that's a library and might not have, other things contained within it. I haven't, like Vex, I don't think explicitly has come up in the work group meetings recently, but I do know that like some of my colleagues that work closely on SBOM are also tracking Vex as well. And it sounds like it's important. It's this technology to work together. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think the other three questions that are open are either just comments or that they've been answered. Actually, I see one from Anthony Harrison that just popped up. There's a lot of activities going on in security and standards to share information, such as SPDX, CycloneDX, and currently via OWASP. How do we ensure that everything is aligned and doesn't compete? I'll jump in with an answer, but I certainly welcome anyone else who's even if you're an attendee and if you've been a part of, because I see some familiar names in the attendee roster for the call as well, if you wanted to share something with on this with us. So as David said, we're trying to be very complementary to all the other efforts out there. We're not trying to be the standards body for cybersecurity. We're not trying to be the open source project for supply chain security. We're not trying to we're trying to be helpful, fill in some gaps, and hopefully be some connective tissue as well. One of the topics that has been more very important, but hasn't yet really had a lot going on at OpenSSF has been the topic of software bill of materials and SBOMs, but it is one that we know is really important. In fact, it was one of the 10 streams in the mobilization plan, was this kind of broader concept of SBOMs everywhere. The more ubiquitous that we can make generating software bill of materials, especially upstream by dependencies, the easier lift it is for folks at the tail end of that supply chain to be able to assemble them and get them out there. And the more likely then that it remains an open source thing rather than something that vendors compete on at the last mile. So one of the issues in talking about SBOMs is that there are two major formats out there. There's a couple of minor ones, but there's really two that have seen widespread adoption. CycloneDX, which has been OAF's project, as well as the SPDX format, which has been a part of the Linux Foundation for a while in a separate project. It's something that started more for license conformance, to make sure everything in your package is appropriately licensed and compatibly licensed with each other. And so it has been extended to cover this kind of inventory regulatory use case, and potentially it could cover some other security use cases, whereas CycloneDX is, comes from kind of the other direction, is predominantly there. Both have such a footprint that we know that one of the important questions out there is how do you come up with, whatever you do in this space, how do you come up with something that will support both, or will use the strengths of each and combine them in some interesting way? And that's going to be a challenge because they take some semantically different approaches to how they name things. You can't quite get just convert from one to the other as if they were, actually GIF to JPEG is a good example of how, when you convert from one to the other, you might lose a bit semantically. Well, we're working that out. There's a special interest group that is formed called the SBOM Everywhere group under the security tooling working group to try to tee up a series of investments that could be made to help improve the tooling out there for SPDX is their first thing, but CycloneDX as well could be a part of that, and then tooling to help with combining of the two and conversion between them and the like. So if you're interested in the topic of SBOMs, come to the Security Tools Working Group, which is the home for this SBOM Everywhere effort. And in the meantime, we have folks from, for example, Alan Friedman from CISA, who is helping us with the conversation. They've been at the U.S. government level really pushing for adoption of SBOMs, and it's working its way into regulatory requirements and the like. So yeah, if this is a particular interest to you, engage with us in the Security Tools Working Group, and especially if you can help us write some code or think about ways to drive adoption and manage the differences between those standards.
If I may jump in, first of all, Brian, thank you very much for pointing specifically to the tools working group. Because as Brian mentioned, that's where the SBOM Everywhere kinds of things are working. You mentioned the word one of the things in that question was ensure alignment. I don't think we can ensure anything. Ensure, E-N-S-U-R-E requires some sort of control that sadly neither the OpenSSF nor I think anyone else truly has that kind of superpower. What we can do is encourage those who encourage organizations and people to collaborate. We can strongly encourage collaboration, but we can ask people to collaborate, but in the end, we can't make them collaborate. That said, for those who are willing to collaborate, I think that we can encourage it. We can provide fora to do that. But we really need to, I think the broader goal here is we need to have everyone focus on that broader goal. We need to improve security. We need to improve identification of, software bill of material information so that people can get their needs met. And so I think that's, ensure, I'm not sure we can manage, but we can at least encourage that kind of collaboration.
Great point. Thanks, David. There's another question that I'd love to see us take, which is, are there any plans, ideas, or groups working on reducing the amount of work for developers while increasing security? This is a pretty important topic, and I've got lots I could say on this, but I'm wondering if this is something Amir wanted to touch on, partly because just from the angle of securing code and doing third-party audits, sometimes the engagement isn't as productive as it could be if the maintainers don't want to engage. But at the same time, if you just show up with things that are broken, that can backfire too, right? Amir, do you want to give like an angle on this, and then maybe I'll give some other context or a bit of another answer?
Absolutely, yeah. One thing that immediately comes to mind is really, I would say, the approach, right? So when we kind of formulated our audit model and started auditing projects at a much higher frequency, one of the things we realized very early on is that open source contributors, maintainers, developers, they are extremely busy. And they are typically doing a lot of things at once, and really asking someone who is already kind of doing a lot to do anything more beyond kind of what they are used to doing or kind of what they do on their day-to-day is a big ask. And so we designed all of our processes and really our mantra to be, we want this to be as minimally disruptive for the maintainers or the contributors as possible. So kind of so really pushing for that from a high level standpoint where, you know, we understand that these that open source maintainers are really doing this really important work, and a lot of times it can be thankless work and especially with limited resources, really just catering to that and understanding that, you know, we want to help you in a way that will not be increasing your workload. Has been very helpful. But at the end of the day, and going back to what you said, David, I mean, you can't really make anyone do anything, especially in the open source space. So I think just pushing for collaboration, you know, how can we help you? How can we help each other? How can we work together is the best approach there.
Yeah, and Ozra, I don't know if you're still online, but I know this is a recurring theme in the Sigstore community as well. Like, how do you get integrations and tooling support to be great? But I'm sure, you know, if your repo suddenly says, hey, you know, we're going to require you to use Sigstore if you're one of the top 100 packages or something like that, suddenly that can come a little bit as a surprise to a developer in their workflow. So can you share a little bit about what like the Sigstore community might be thinking on this front about how to make adoption easier, or you know, kind of address this concern that you're just creating more work for me by developers? Not to put you on the spot a bit, but
No, that's a fair question. I think that a lot of us have been thinking about this with regards to like the tooling that we're building on top of Sigstore. So a handful of us, like for example, the Trail of Bits shout out that I did earlier, a lot of us are trying to integrate within GitHub Actions directly, and hoping that most projects have those workflows. But we do anticipate and know that there are going to be problems in some of those. Like for example, people who, you know, maybe are relying on GCB or like external builds and workflows like that. So I think we're slowly coming to more and more tooling that is easy to use and also in cross language, but I think it will take time. And I think a majority of that is going to be targeted towards CI/CD systems that we're familiar with.
that's great. And I'll just add, yeah, this is something that's on our mind as staff and on the minds of, I know, the TAC, as well as we talk about our plans, our ambitions, our ideas, our goals. We have to keep in mind that there's no open source developer I know of who feels like they get to all of the things on their to-do list every day. You know, there's no open source project that doesn't have open PRs in need of review, in need of some help. You know, no open source project that feels like they have enough documentation for what they're doing, and none of them who are asking for more steps, you know, just for the sake of asking for steps and bureaucracy, right? So everything that comes out of the OpenSSF should have this thought towards, like, how do we make it actually worthwhile for the devs? How do we create incentives? How do we have this actually solving problems for the devs, not just for downstream end users, right? And at the same time, trying to engage downstream end users in the work that we do. And so there's a group kind of talking about putting together an end user working group who would be focused on the needs of developers and of organizations who aren't at the platform or the cloud layer or the tooling software layer, but instead view themselves as kind of as the last mile in that supply chain, right? And how do their needs kind of get expressed upstream? And maybe there's work that they can do to help something that they wouldn't have otherwise realized kind of further upstream, make their lives and the lives of other end users easier. And then there's other groups like the Cloud Native Compute Foundation has if I understand it, a contributor experience SIG that focuses entirely on what's it like to contribute to CNCF projects, but then also a bit about using those projects and getting them integrated into other pieces. So that's something that our community could launch a similar thing. So I think there's more work to do in the space for OpenSSF. And I'll just end with, yeah, everything in the mobilization plan, all of those streams has had a component of how do we not just build a thing, but drive adoption of it and help with the adoption and help, you know, when we fund a third-party audit, also fund the work to do to fix the bugs that are found at the same time, right? And so that's a recurring theme, and it's a really important question on our minds.
Yeah, if I can jump in, just quick additions. I mean, I think pretty much every project, every SIG, you know, every working group repeatedly comes back to how can we make this easier. Partial answers include automation as much as you can, ideally making the defaults wherever you can. If you can't do that, then at least, you know, guides to help people do that quickly. and many, I think, I don't have any numbers, but I think in the majority, if not all of these, the majority of the people involved are in fact developers themselves. So we're painfully aware of the challenges because we also have those challenges. I think long-term education's going to have to be part of that, because part of the problem is that we've got a lot of interfaces that are by default are very hard to use securely. So we need people to think about when they make interfaces, how do I make that secure by default? That won't happen overnight, but the more we have people educated, the better and more likely that'll be. Thanks.
Thanks. I think we have this time for this one last question from an anonymous anonymous attendee asking it, but it's how is the OpenSSF engaging with EMEA and APAC governments? So first I want to clarify in our engagement with the U.S. government and in general how we'd like to engage with governments. We're not a lobbying organization, so we're not about like let's get more laws into government regulations about only spending money on open source code or anything like that. What we're there to do when we engage with like the US government and others is to say, here's what we are doing in the private sector, so to speak. Here's how you can get involved as a major consumer of open source code. The US government and governments around the world are using a huge amount, but also as they're writing open source code and contributing it back upstream, here's things you could think about doing or supporting to make that even more secure, even more impactful. And then finally, there is a role we think for governments, in the same way that they fund bridges and highways and that they help with the electrical grid and water systems. Open source has become critical infrastructure, and so our hope is that we can inspire them to get involved and direct some funds and efforts in ways that we find compatible. And many of them from the U.S. have engaged in many of our working groups. I mentioned Alan Friedman, for example, and the like. I don't want to single him out. Certainly, there's others. And so that is as a frame that we can have started to have some conversations with some other governments as well. There's nothing to announce formally on that front yet. There's some meetings coming up in APAC this next 2 weeks, and then when we're all out in Dublin, we're hoping to have some similar conversations out there. But we'll talk to anybody. We'll tell them what we're doing, and we'll look for ways to bring them into our community as peers with all of you, and move this ball forward. So that's about all I have to really report on that, but it's exciting stuff. And if any of you know of opportunities to connect with governments in your region or people who are simply interested in wanting to learn more about what we're doing or the open source community is doing on security, please connect us, because we'd love that. And I think time for, I think we've answered this one. And Tejas asks, how do I get involved in the OpenSSF community? Hopefully we've given you a bunch of answers to this. I really want to highlight Slack as like the best informal way to get connected to the people behind the different projects and working groups and the like. Please come there and get to know people. Open source, it's kind of like Soylent Green. It's made of people. So that's the best way to I think start to come up to speed on what we're doing, and we'll keep in mind opportunities for internship and make sure folks are very aware of that. And then finally, a nice closing note from Tracy. Thank you so much for that. She says, not a question, just a comment. Great job. This was a great update on what you're up to. Thanks to the team for pulling it together. And let me relay that as a thank you to David, to Azra, to Dustin, to Amir, to Jennifer Bly and Jennifer Bonner and Jory and everyone, and Kahil and everyone on the OpenSSF staff who helped make this work. But most of all, to the broader OpenSSF contributor community for making this such a fun project to be involved in. And hopefully all of you decide to join and be a part of that from this point forward. So thank you to everyone, and we'll see you and talk again soon.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Take care. Have a good day. And this recording will be up on YouTube, and we'll send a link out by email to the deck, as well as to a survey. So please be sure and fill those out. And with that, thank you all. Goodbye.